This is Writing Daily. My name is Devin, and every single day we get together to talk about some sort of a writerly thing. We talk about how to be a better poet, to put yourself out there, to write and finish your novel, whatever it is. We kind of got you covered all over the place. And so my name is Devin Galaudet. I am the editor-in-chief of In the Know Traveler, and I am also the author of the forthcoming memoir, 10,000 Miles, with my dead father's ashes. Usually, I don't know if it's a pleasure or not, but I get to flap my gums for 10 minutes at you, unless I have somebody wonderful to present you that will help you be a better writer, who has experience in writing, who's published books, or is a teacher. And today we have like a total pro that like runs the gamut, a woman I've known actually since I got my MFA 10 years ago, a lovely woman named Marya Summers. Marya, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Devin. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. So I am first going to just jump in by reading your bio, which is for more than 20 years, Marya Summers has taught creative writing and essay writing at colleges, universities, and community organizations, including at Palm Beach Institute of Contemporary Art, where she was poet in residence. That's actually very fancy. She has published hundreds of essays and articles and published and performed her poetry on stages across the country, including National Poetry Slam, and was published in Freedom to Speak, an anthology of National Poetry Slam's best poetry. Her holistic approach to writing were published in Beyond the Frontier, Innovations in First-Year Composition, published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing. She currently is working on a book of practical magic for writers. We're going to want to know about that, and teaching workshops on the subject. I'm going to say it again. Marya, welcome. How are you?
I'm fabulous. I love Wednesdays because they've got kooky energy, and I just like to go with whatever flies at me. So this is what we're doing today. I'm really excited.
Well, I'm so glad. So as I've already said, I know you. I would say that we are buds. We've certainly done writing groups together, and we come from Antioch, which is probably like a permanent Wednesday in terms.
It is a permanent Wednesday, yes.
Yes. So there's kookiness abounds. Hopefully, people will sort of appreciate where we're coming from today, and so. I kind of want to know a little bit more about, I don't know you as a poetry slammer. Can you kind of give us a little bit more insight of what that means and what that entails?
Sure. Poetry slam is competitive performance poetry. So instead of just having poems on the page and doing a poetry reading, back in the 80s, a construction worker named Mark Smith said, hey, instead of boring the crap out of people and making poetry readings all about the poet, why not really engage the audience? So he made it kind of like a game show, and he gave the audience scorecards, said, judge these poems on a scale of 0 to 10. There was 5 audience members, absolutely no qualifications necessary to judge the poetry. It was just like, how do you reach the common person? And Poetry Slam was born. So it popped up in Chicago. That's where it started. And then over the 20 plus years that it's been around, there are Poetry Slams almost in every community. And it's gotten so big that there are regional and local and state. And I should probably do that in order. Like we've got local, state, regional, and national, competitions. And there's even international competitions at this point. So it's just a really fabulous way for people to perform their poetry. Think of it as a marriage of theater and poetry, right? So they get 3 minutes to perform their poem, and then those judges do their thing. And every time you get a high score, you advance to the next round. And people who don't score as well, they don't advance. So as you go to nationals, for instance, you get the best of the best poems. And it's a really fabulous event that lasts a week long. So every nationals is in a different location every year. So it's really just, I don't know, I would think of it like a utopia of poetry.
So, and it's something that you love. Can I ask how you got started in that?
Yeah, I've been writing poetry since I was a kid, and I did it in college, and I sort of had this weird relationship with poetry where I really wanted to do it, but I didn't think I was worthy. I was like, oh, I'm not worthy. And so I bought a CD in a cutout bin in a record store of some of the best of the National Poetry Slam. This was back in the, I think, late 90s. And after listening to that CD, I was like, oh, I got to go check this out. I got to see it live, right? And so I bought an airplane ticket to the National Poetry Slam and went and checked that out. And it was like watching rock stars on stage. It was just rock stars of words, you know? And I came back, and I was a columnist at that time. I had a weekly column. It was bi-weekly at first, and then it went weekly for about 10 years in South Florida. And so I came back from this fabulous experience, and I was writing about it in my column. And then a local slam popped up in my community, and I went there, and I was terrified. Like, my hands were shaking, my whole body was shaking. And I read my little poem. And at the time, I was an academic poet. I'd had lots and lots of college. And so I knew what a good poem was. And I was pretty sure I wasn't writing it, but it was like my first, I think, foray into really claiming my voice, you know, and really standing up and finding that. So from there, I became a slam mistress, which means I ran my own slam, and we did weekly slams and went to regionals and nationals. And I did that for about 5 years.
So did performing your poetry make you a better writer?
Performing my poetry made me a better performer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Forgive my ignorance on the subject. It's just I wasn't sure if the performing element inspired you to write more or to write better, knowing that you were going to be in front of, you know, a lot of people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't want to get too far off on the poetry slam thing, because this is a real can of worms, and I could go on for like 3 hours with all the information on the poetry slam. But I will tell you this. There's a real division between page and stage poets. So page poets are those who print and publish poems and generally do poetry readings. And then there are those who are really like wed to the slam community. They actually might not publish their poetry. Like it exists only in this spoken form. And there is a group that's kind of in this sweet spot in the middle where the poems both work on the page and they work in performance. That's a very small segment, I would say, of the greater poetry world, right? So, when you get into the slam scene, it very much in some ways becomes about winning. And it's hard to separate those things, like, you know, because you don't get advanced. People don't get to hear your poems if you don't win. And so there is, in some aspects, a pandering to the audience, right? Like, this is a crowd pleaser, which, in my opinion, and many people disagree, and I don't want to really spend a lot of time opening this can of worms, but, you know, I think the pandering does advance you. It doesn't necessarily make for the best poetry. So it's, you know, you think about the difference between great jazz and pop music, right? And so great jazz has a smaller audience. Pop music sells like hotcakes, but, you know, and again, we could argue all day about which is the better art form, right?
Yep. Very cool. So kind of moving on to your thing, what is a note in your bio, which was, I think sounds very interesting, is that you are currently working on a book of practical magic for writers and teachers of workshops on the subject. What is that?
Well, Devin, I have been teaching writing for 20 years at the college level. And, that came with a whole bunch of college classes that I had to do myself. And before Antioch, I did another master's program in a traditional university. And so I've been really inculcated with like lots of academia and a lot of writing knowledge, like both literary and composition and rhetoric, right? And so as I've been going through all my own education and then educating others, a lot of what I saw was that there had been this movement away from what used to be like a product-based pedagogy, meaning that we were a long time ago, like 50s, 60s, right? We're looking at teaching people how to make a writing product, like a finished essay. This is what a finished essay looks like, or this is what a finished story looks like. And there was this emphasis on product, like this finished product. And then we saw a movement away from that to a process-based pedagogy, which is probably what everyone now is familiar with. So that's when your English teacher is saying, hey, like do some free writing, do some journal writing, do some brainstorming and get your ideas out. And then take that and shape it into a draft. And then revise your draft and show it to other people and revise it again and then edit it and then proofread it, right? Those are all different steps. If a writer is not familiar with the process-based thing and they're just going in and trying to like, hey, I'm trying to write a book and knock it all out in one attempt, or as I see my students do, which is sit down the night before an essay is due and get that all cranked out, right? People find a lot of resistance. And this is talked about just widely in writing pedagogy, which just means an approach to teaching writing or approach to writing. So what I saw is that there was this very much like, just do it. Like, just show up, put your butt in the seat, put your fingers to the keyboard and get it done, right? Which is absolutely necessary. But that lots of times we show up and we put in the work and the magic just doesn't happen. You know what I mean? Like we have like the copy is just like a dead fish. It's like just laying there. You're like, okay, I wanted a body of work, but not this corpse, So it's like, how do we animate it? And a lot of times it feels beyond our control. And I think that every writer, unless they are somehow magically plugged in, and there's that magic that I'm talking about, knows exactly what I'm talking about, right? So we do our work, we take our writing classes, we read our books on writing, we sit there and, for instance, I recently had a client who wrote a 1,200 page novel. And then she abandoned that and wrote another like 300 page novel. And then by the time she had gotten to me, she had 3 novels, all of substantive length. But she's just like, I can't get them to work. And so she was showing up and she said that her approach was, if, my butt was in the chair, then I was doing my work. And so this magical approach is like that thing that's missing, right? That spark, that animation, that thing that just like magically like lets like everything fall into place. And so that's what I've been working on for, well, I would say it's been about 8 years now that I've been working on this project, and like asking, how do we, instead of demystifying writing, like, and that was the original approach, like we're going to enter a process-based thing and like get rid of the mystery so people aren't intimidated by writing. But that was great, and that was a great starting point. But practical magic for writers is the idea of like, how do we re-infuse the craft with that mystery, with that mysticism, right? So we're remystifying it.
So what is that remystification? Is there sort of like a starting point, or how does that, I mean, I've, as you know, have studied sort of the Western mysteries for many years, and I'm passionate about it. But how does that apply sort of in your, and I was going to say process, but how does that apply in your not process?
No, it's totally a process.
Okay.
It is a process. You're absolutely right. It's a process. But what you just did there, you asked that question, that's the starting point. So this idea of like recognizing that there is something missing and saying, oh, I have like, how do I do this? I break everything into, as I teach it, because you need a system to teach things. Without a system, it's just like a hodgepodge of mishmash, garbage and gook.
Which is frowned upon in society, right?
Sometimes mucking about is great fun, but it's not really effective for teaching things.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Agree. So how does this process?
Well, I look at it through the lens or through the system of the four elements, the four classical elements of air, fire, water, and earth. And these are symbolic of different qualities, principles of the writing life, right? So when you ask a question, right, that's fire energy. It's an initiatory energy. So just by having that question of like, oh, how do I do this? That's like sets things in motion. So that's why I call it practical magic for writers, because when we start recognizing that the things that we do every day, like asking questions, are actually magical, right? So once you conceive of a question, then you can find an answer, and an answer is earth-based energy, right? So we're looking at this, how can we recognize where our strengths are, right? There are people who ask lots of questions, but then don't do anything with the information that comes as a result, right? They might not use it and then put it in motion. Or what my current focus is air. I've been teaching an air workshop. It's not called air, it's actually called genius, because the air corresponds to the mind. So we look at, how do we get this inspiration, and how do we kind of connect with the spirit of our novel or our essay or our poem? Like, how do we connect with that spirit? And so a great starting point is just having that curiosity and coming to it with like, what's missing? What do I need? Right. And I always tell people, light a candle, honor like this magical space that you're coming into of writing. Right. And it seems like a very simple thing, but I invite people to try that the next time they sit down, to just light a candle. And people are like, okay, I'll light a candle, whatever. I don't know what to expect, but, or I don't know how that's going to shift things. But I find that like lighting that candle and saying, this is special time for me in my writing, just like you would when you light a candle at the dinner table, when you're going to have some romance, right, with another person. It's like, I'm signifying that this is special time between me and the spirit of my writing, and that I enter relationship in that way.
So is it about creating a sacred space for your writing, or to ritualize it, for lack of a better description? In other words, like, if somebody were to go to church, they might kneel, in the pews at some point, or do confessional, or one of hundreds of other things that we do that are sort of kind of ritually based. Are you suggesting that's the kind of thing that you do with writing?
Absolutely. So ritual does help. It signals our brain, oh, this is a special time for whatever. And, as we're working with air element and the mind, it's that signal that this is a time and a space for this activity. But beyond ritual, beyond that air element and that signifier, there's also, if we look at water element, right? And water element would be like our feeling self. Think about how atmosphere really impacts your writing or your, and again, I'll go to the idea of relationship. If you're in relationship with your writing, right? This idea that we're setting the mood for it is really, becomes part of the magic. So think about how different you feel when you go on a date with someone and you're wearing something that makes you feel good and kind of sexy, and the atmosphere around you is conducive to conversation, and it feels like there's a little like je ne sais quoi in the,
Uh-huh.
yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying, because you want to set, I think there's a certain sense that you want to have an overall mood. I think that you want to be in relationship. I remember, matter of fact, a teacher at Antioch who would talk about how she would literally, she'd be taking a shower and then she would almost invoke the characters of her novel into the shower so she could connect with them,
Yes.
not in any kind of weird way, but just sort of like connect with them so that she knew what they were about and what they needed to be. And that relationship for her needed to be as real as possible so she could authentically portray those characters with as much realism
Mm.
and authenticity as possible. Are we kind of on the right track?
Yeah, and it's one of the things, Devin, is that that person, that teacher at Antioch, clearly was doing his or her own writing magic, right? They already knew that there was this the need to holistically work like mind, body, and spirit, right? So it's one of the things I loved about Antioch. Was there wasn't an acknowledgement among many in that community that there was a spiritual component to our writing. But so that person doesn't need to be taught how to do it, right? They're
Right.
already working. And people will find, it's like with any teacher, you learn how that person approaches it. And once you learn their way, you can start personalizing it. Like, oh, that didn't really work for me. I want to try it this way. I feel better. So, when I'm working with people, I make it very clear, like, if you're an atheist and don't believe in anything is out there, that's fine. Like, everyone believes in psychology, right? That we have a psyche, and that on the impact of the subconscious. And so some people believe that, there are entities out there, be they gods or angels or, different deities of that sort. And there are other people who are like, no, I don't believe that. This can work for everyone, because everyone says, yeah, you know what? I do recognize when I light a candle, I feel really differently. And when I put on something purple, I get this like relaxed and kind of feeling where I'm inspired, right? So it doesn't really matter what you believe. It still works.
Yeah, no, and again, I think if nothing else, to get yourself in the mood, to get yourself into the headspace of writing or problem solving in a manuscript or a storyline or character development or whatever, I think is kind of critical, especially when we're invested in writing the best work that we can.
Absolutely. And, Devin, most of what I find, so when I work with students at college, freshmen and sophomores, many of them don't have a lot of interest in writing. Like, they're writing because they have to for their degree, right? But I also work with people who are in graduate school, and I work with people who are, not in school at all. Now, my private clients are people who are working on their own manuscripts and their own writing projects. It's a different problem with those people. I find that, and if I'm going to talk about things in terms of elements, right, they already have the projective elements nailed down. Projective elements are your air and fire elements. And those are the ones, like, air is mind, right? So these are smart people who have lots of ideas and they're really on the ball. And fire is the will. So they're driven. They're going to show up. They have goals. They want to get these things done. Those aren't problems for them, right? The problem is in the not doing. And so they have been taught to think a lot and show up and get the work done, but they haven't really cultivated the receptive side. So we're talking about the difference between the projective elements and the receptive elements. And the receptive ones are water and earth. And so I find that most of my private clients really need some help working with the receptive qualities, which is where the magic comes in, right? So this idea that you become a vessel that is in some ways passively filled. You need both. You need, it's kind of like it's very sexy. It's like masculine and feminine energy, but you need both to manifest these. But I find that most of my private clients anyway, and myself included, like I am my own client, tend to be, their superpowers are mental and will driven, right? Powers. And I find even especially with myself, that I am constantly mindful that I become a receptive vessel, so that I'm allowing the magic to trickle in, right? Or to come full force, like,
So if I understand you correctly, does this mean that in practicing to be a receptive vessel, as you described it, is there a certain, and you described it as passive, is there a certain active quality that you do in order to develop that thing?
Right. Yes. It's a dance of energy, right? So we move from the masculine to the feminine, and then back to the masculine to the feminine. So there's a polarity that kind of pulls our manuscripts from us. Wouldn't that be great if it just just pulled out of us? I mean, and that's literally what happens. You get this energy of the masculine, which initiates, the feminine, which receives, and then that's polarized back to the masculine. So you can't just sit there all the darn day, come to me manuscript. Like, you got to do the work of showing up. But most people understand that. It seems pretty common sense. The part that I think most of us are missing is that showing up is not enough in and of itself, because then you may just have leaden characters, right? If you're not breathing life into them, or you may just have a setting that is peopled with, there's lots of people, and you've got the towns named, and you've got all this stuff, but it hasn't come to life yet. So that would be an example of that. Just in case, one of your podcast listeners here on Writing Daily has an opposite problem. Like, let's say they have a lot of feminine energy. Maybe they're very water. So they're in their writing and it's like, oh, my writing feels so good. Like, I write all these poems, and, but they might not have a lot of discipline, right? So the idea is to spot where in your magic you're not letting the magic flow through, right? Where in your writing you're not letting the magic flow through, and go, hey, yeah, you're there writing all these poems by the ocean side, right? But you're really lacking an understanding of the craft, right, itself. They might be served by more air element or fire element, and the discipline is showing up to their craft. So it's not all just about sitting around like a vessel, but most of my clients are they already got the showing up and the chops, you know what I mean?
Right. So I'm assuming that most writers have some kind of a something, whether we're calling it writer's block or whether we're calling it, bad writing. I'm assuming there's some kind of a component, because I think writing well is one of the most difficult things that we can do. I think it's really challenging to consistently write down. I mean, I think there's a handful of people who have sort of, like Stephen King comes to mind. He has the ability to sit down and pour it out. I don't know what his first drafts look like, but he has the ability to write, a 2,000 word novel. Right?
And he has a book on writing, it's a craft book.
He does. It's actually sitting on my nightstand right now, and I'm reading it for the second time. It's a great book, and it has nothing to do with horror.
No, and he talks about, the writer's toolbox in that book, and that would be very much an air element thing, right? Go get the knowledge of how to write, right? This is how you develop a character, and this is how you construct a plot line, right? So those things are very nuts and bolts, and it's super helpful to see how he worked. And it's a bit of a memoir as well, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a memoir on writing. And I mean, I think that's the title of the book, is On Writing.
Yeah, it is.
And he's he's an interesting character, to be sure,
For
sort of
sure.
like in the writing universe. So in what you do, you're writing a book on this subject. Is that correct?
I just got it back from the editor last week,
Hmm.
so I have a little bit of editing to do. But other than that, yeah, it should be going. I don't know. It should be finished and ready for publishing by the end of the summer, I expect.
Well, that's fantastic. And is it also a class? It's a series of classes. Is that correct?
It's yeah,
Or is
I
it
have a
one component of this is a class?
right. There's a 13-week online workshop that I'm teaching this practical magic for writers, and it's actually starting next week, which was June 14th.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, they can go to practicalmagicforwriters.com, and all the information is there on the workshop if they're interested. Yep.
Good. I mean, can you give us just sort of like, you don't have to give us all 13 weeks, but can you give us sort of an overview of what somebody who's interested in taking your class can expect?
Absolutely. The very first week we talk about the what we just talked about, which is basically magic and the elements and how those affect our writing and how we apply them. And then from there we go and focus on air element specifically in the mind of the writer. I started with the mind because that's generally where most of us think we exist, right? We're like, oh, if you say like, who are you? Like generally they think like what's going on between their ears as themselves. So I start there in air element. And then we move through 5 more segments, which is we start with the spirit and nature of our genius. And then we look at the inspiration of our genius, then the quest of genius, followed by the mysticism of genius and the wisdom of genius. So there's these different aspects of our intellect, of our genius that we look at. And each week there's a lesson, and then the following week there's a webinar that supports that. So they'll get like 15 to 20 pages of a lesson emailed to them one week, and then the next week there's a webinar that answers their questions and unlocks, like, unpacks, I should say, rather than unpacks some of the ideas that were in those lessons. So,
And I'm assuming there's also some practical application as well. In other words, they'll,
well, the reason I call it practical magic for writers is because there's a lot of practical, we're all writing through the whole thing. So it's not like we're just lighting candles and burning stuff and not writing. So a lot of what goes on in the workshop is writing prompts that connect either to a project that you're currently working on, or if you don't have a project, it's like, here's a bunch of think of them as writing prompts, but ways to like enter writing. So whether you have like an existing project, or you're starting a new one, or you just want to start a new one, the idea is how do we set that magic in motion in whatever it is that you want to write.
That's fantastic. Marya, I know it sounds well, and honestly, I think I was part of one of your first go rounds, like a different incarnation.
Yeah.
It was like one of an initial incarnation, which was quite a while ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Devin, the whole idea of this was like a gift to me. It was one of those magical things where it was like a download. I was at a yoga festival and I'd taken some time off to the side to do my little meditation, whatever. And like, it came to me like, you should teach practical magic for writers. And I'm like, what is that? I don't even know what is that? And yeah, you were in the very first round when I was still figuring out what it was.
Well, I consider myself lucky. So anyway, that was wonderful. So I'm assuming this is like 10 times better now. After it's been, you keep massaging it. I'm assuming that's how it goes, right?
Massaging and developing. Yeah. When you attended, there were all 4 elements in a 8-week workshop. So we go like air, webinar, fire, webinar, on and on through the other ones. And as I continued to work on air, it just grew and grew. So that 2 weeks that we spent on air is now 13 weeks. So
wow. So you've really unpacked it to make it worthwhile.
absolutely.
I love that. So, okay. So if somebody has questions about this, so what was the name of that website again?
It's practicalmagicforwriters.com. That's all the information that just supports this one workshop. I also have other offerings on my website, holycreative.com. That's holy, like entirely creative, WHOLLY, holycreative.com, where I have essays about yoga and writing and blogs and all that kind of stuff. So either website will take you to practicalmagicforwriters.com and give you the information on writing magic.
And Holy Creative is a great way to get in touch with you directly in case somebody has questions or
yes. And if you want to send me an email, it's Marya, MARYA @holycreative.com. So I'm happy to answer any questions people have. It's that's probably the best way to get a hold of me is through that email.
This has been really fun. I am so glad that you did this. And by the way, for those who've been watching, I probably was supposed to say this 12 times, but if you like what we're doing, make sure you hit the like button and share and subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher or Google Play. I mean, we're kind of all over the place, YouTube, all that sort of stuff. So whether you're watching us live, this is as an aside, if you're watching us live, you can always ask questions. The same is true if you're watching in any of these formats. I get emails all the time for this, and I answer everything. And if you have a particular question that I love, I might even do an episode on this. But for now, Marya, I want to thank you so much for giving this sort of practical magic for writers, sort of like vision and weight and reality, because I think it's something that's going to resonate with an awful lot of people who want to kind of start creating a mysticism about their writing and their creation process and give it some more fire in it so they can do more writing the way they want to.
Thank you so much, Devin. I'm so excited for you and your new book, 10,000 Miles with My Dead Father's Ashes. That's fantastic. I was there with you while you were writing
You sat in the living room and gave me expert criticism and were supportive across the board. And
now the magic is happening.
Now the magic is happening, and now it's just, what do? We keep marching forward as writers. It's a whole different energy, to be sure, but we're doing it. And I love your new class, and I think it's fantastic. And so they can find you at Holy Creative or practicalmagicforwriters.com. Correct?
That's absolutely right.
Marya, thank you so much for today. And I know I'm going to be talking to you soon. And anyway, that's what I've got for today with Writing Daily. Thanks so much for joining us. We are going to tomorrow be talking about, as a matter of fact, it might even be our 100th episode. I'm going to have to double check on that. So it'll be an exciting day. And more on writing and how to do it better and more of it, and give us resources and opportunities and just get our stuff done in the best way possible. Anyway, this has been Devin Galaudet for Writing Daily. Thank you so much for joining us as I trip over my words. And I will see you guys again tomorrow. Thanks.